Sean Wensley downing his tea in England. Sean Wensley is a veterinarian, but oh my God, so much more than that. One of the most extraordinary nature writers I have ever read. His book, Through a Vet's Eyes, How to Care for Animals and Treat Them Better. Now, I learned about it from Mark Beckhoff, brilliant, brilliant ethologist who has a monthly column in Psychology Today. I adore him. He's been on the show many times. And he finds these books that maybe wouldn't cross my path otherwise. And I thought, this is nice. A wonderful UK veterinarian. He's probably going to do a James Herriot. This is what I thought, Sean. I thought you're going to take us on a walkabout on your life as a veterinarian. Oh, no, that is not what this book is. This book is just riveting on so many levels, but it's really your view of the world as a naturalist, a man who will crawl on his belly to the edge of a cliff to look at birds whose names, not that they're called Tom, Dick, and Harry, but they're bird, and how they behave. And you describe them in the most poetic terms. And then in that same chapter, you will talk about how sheep's tails are docked, or their ears are debudded, or their testicles are removed with the same marvelous writing. Have you been working on this book your entire life? No, really, I
Mhm.
mean that because it covers your whole life as a young man interested in birds, particularly the first chapter about the Australian zebra finches is brilliant. But have you always known you were going to write? When did you become a writer along with all the other things you've done as a doctor?
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks for all your kind comments, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you. Yeah, it does pack a lot in. You're right about the James Herriot part, and that can, for better or worse. So there is a sort of something of a rich and well-established genre of
Yes,
veterinary memoir, I guess, trailblazed not least by James Herriot. And
right.
that gives these lovely lyrical and
Yes, sweet,
insightful
funny.
images of rural life in,
Yes,
in England and the role of vets in communities doing their honest and much appreciated work. But
yes,
increasingly, as I went from being a young boy who had the great fortune to grow up close to the coast and the pine woods and wildlife rich sand dunes, then wanting to become a vet and ultimately qualifying as a vet, I became increasingly interested and concerned about the context in which veterinary work is embedded. And we're working at the human animal interface and all of those relationships that exist between human and animals. And of course, there are, as we are all becoming so much more aware of, ethical
yes,
dilemmas and problems there. And so I think, yeah, blending all of that together, I've been, as through the book, involved in policy work around
yes,
trying to improve the lives of animals one way or another. But I wanted to try and bring some of the issues and some of the policy recommendations to a wider non-specialist audience. And my reasons for, I guess, trying to do that in the wrapper and the package of nature writing,
yes,
which you've
yes,
mentioned, was threefold. So one, because it's in the genre of memoir and first person experience, because I'm a childhood naturalist and a lifelong naturalist, I wanted to try and convey that for purposes of authenticity and say, this is me, this is where my heart is.
yes.
Let's walk a mile together. So there's something about that. There was then something about the balance of not wanting to spend a whole book saying how miserable and unfortunate many animals' lives are at
Correct.
human hands. There was a bit of balance. We talk about something that's ethically problematic and maybe not very pleasant, and then go back out into nature and take a deep breath and remind ourselves that there's beauty in the world as well as suffering. And that's authentic as well, because that's what I've done again my whole life to try and deal with some of the difficult stuff. And then thirdly, just a reminder that all of these animals that we're so privileged to have in our lives as domesticated species do have wild
Yes,
progenitors and wild
yes.
cousins. They've all come from somewhere and they retain a lot of that inherited, evolved behavior and motivations and the things that make them the pigginess of a pig or the cowness of a cow, even
Yes.
irrespective of the benefits that we now derive from them. So that was the broad brush rationale.
I think that the weaving, the blending, the sewing together of looking up at the sky, you love the birds and you look at the sky a lot and you write about it in ways that I have never experienced. I feel I'm lying in the field with you or sitting on the bench having the sandwich with you and seeing out to sea or up in the sky or the The one about the fox, which we'll discuss in a minute, was extraordinary, befriending this fox, which when we talk about it, I want to ask if you know of the book Fox, Fox and Me. Do you know that book?
No, I haven't. No, I
Oh
don't know that one.
my goodness, you will faint. It's so good. This woman who
Excellent.
was, yeah, lived it was a forest ranger in America and befriended a fox in ways that apparently are not humanly possible. And yet Sean
Mm.
Wensley did it too. I'll see if I can find a way to send you a copy. It's that good, especially for a man like you who lies in the grass or at the edge of a cliff in order to experience nature. But what you did wasn't just to describe how factory farm animals are managed, and never with gory details, and never wagging a finger and saying, and we should all just eat lettuce for the rest of our life, because that's pretty much, even carrots probably have feelings. I'm exaggerating a little,
Mm.
but
Mm.
anytime we learn about any of these animals who are eaten, or eat eggs, or eat cheese, all of it has some some you don't use words like suffering or misery. You simply describe it. But the good thing is because you did advocate for them legally, policy wise, you talk about the laws and how they changed in the UK and in the EU, both of which are far superior to what we've done in the United States in terms of rules against things which are cruel and unusual and unnecessary. And there's a better way to do it. There have been any number of books written about, oh, woe is me. Look at these poor beef cattle. Look at these poor hens, and even the free range ones, they're not free and there's no range. Okay. So
Mm.
we've read those books and they just leave you in kind of despair and confusion. Close your eyes and chew. Don't think about it. Whereas
Mm.
in your book, you juxtapose those birds that are kept in captivity for pleasure, not for eating, like the finches, like the parrots, with the wild ones. Will you talk a little bit about this extraordinary experiment you personally did with the Australian zebra finches, where you sat and watched them the way, just the way Jane Goodall sat and watched the chimpanzees? You just got them used to you. You describe why that's important, and you observed them. So you could see what is it that they really need and want. And you talk throughout the book of how scientists have measured what is suffering for an animal. You measure heart rate, you measure temperature, you measure cortisol levels, you measure behaviors, and you bring science to something which otherwise we just have a knee-jerk emotion about. Oh, they don't feel
Mm.
anything, or they feel too much, and now I feel too much. Talk about the finches. It's a great beginning to the book, I think.
Yeah, thank you. It was a life-changing experience for me. So I was a young veterinary undergraduate at that time, but prior to vet school, I used to work, not least because I wanted to become a vet, at a local pet shop.
Yes.
And we were busy. It was a weekend job. We would have queues of people out of our little Aladdin's cave of stuff that people come in and buy. But as well as stuff, we sold live animals, as many pet shops do. Perhaps less so actually now in the UK than they used to. But we had, yeah, this sort of wall to wall bank of
Yes.
cages with mice and rats and the caged birds. And and they do the likes of budgies and canaries, little lovebirds, and these little zebra finches, which are native to Australia. As a young teenager, they're just making a bit of pocket money to go and spend with my friends in the evening, but having clearly a love of animals and a desire to be a vet. I just wondered what really, although we did our best to look after those zebra finches in terms of keeping them and the other birds, keeping them clean and keeping their water drinkers and their feeders topped up, there's that sort of element of responsible care. It was still a tiny little cage and they only had a perch and they didn't seem to have much else. So the opportunity arose while I was an undergraduate. There's a great charity called the University's Federation for Animal Welfare, U4, who are UK based, although they work internationally now. And they offered what at the time they called their vacation scholarships. I could apply for a modest sum of money and ask an interesting question, which was my first, and this is the whole purpose of the scheme, my first foray into what
Yeah.
you've just mentioned is now called and recognized as animal welfare science. So I replicated the pet shop conditions for 70 zebra finches. And I did that at my old school. They were very helpful and gave me an outbuilding, which I first of all had to clear of all of the old
Yeah.
desks and chairs. And they were really supportive of me coming back to my school and basically disappearing into an outbuilding with 70 finches. And I had a pair of step ladders. I perched at the top of them once the birds were all settled into their cages. And yeah, they didn't know me at the start, as they didn't know lots of customers in the cages in the shop. So when you approach a cage of birds, they tend to all stop what they're doing and go up onto the perches. And they might look relaxed, but they're sitting there and they're
Yes.
watching and they're waiting and they're nervous, they're wary. But if you do that for long enough, as you say, if you go through that process of habituation, as Jane Goodall famously did with the chimpanzees, they become accustomed to you. They
Yeah.
get used to you. You know, that's
No
not rocket
worries.
science.
No,
Yeah,
not a
it's just that strange chap again. He seems to just put food in the cage and then sits there for hours. He seems okay. And you see that thaw. It is, if you're motivated and interested to do that, it's a lovely experience to go through because you see their wariness
yes.
thaw and you see them starting to resume their rich daily lives with each other. Some of them are nuzzling and preening each other because they formed pair bonds. Others of them are consistently jabbing at each other because they don't like each other very much. It all
Yes.
unfolds before you. And something called an ethogram, which I was able to create, is essentially a list of all the behaviors that they do. You watch them for the first week or so and just list everything they do. And there's only so many behaviors that actually any creature
Right.
can do. So
Right.
eventually you've listed them all. They perch, they jab, they preen, they chase each other, whatever.
Yep.
And then you can go through the next few weeks. And I was about 5 weeks in total, just ticking boxes. There's an instance of preening, there's this, that. What I started to see was some of the indicators of poor welfare that have actually been better studied in other species. For example, repetitive, unvarying, abnormal behavior, which we call stereotypical behavior. I found one paper where that had been recorded in canaries maybe 30 years previously. And they did two types of stereotypical behaviors. Some of them would root trace and they just go round and round and round the cage. And some of them would spot peck. So they became fixated on just a blank piece of the cage. I just peck it and peck it and peck it and peck it. So that was abnormal. And then there were other things, so very high levels of aggression. Some of them were really bullied. They were individuals that were outcasts essentially, and they were horribly bullied, which happens in nature, but in nature, in the
They can
wild
get
of
away.
Australia,
They
they
get
can
away.
get away. Yeah.
Yes.
So in a little cage, they became really susceptible to severe bullying. And what really surprised me actually on that was when I noticed on the back of one of the birds, he or she had lost a lot of feathers. They were actually pecking each other and pecking the poor bird's feathers out. Whereas I must say, even working with them in the pet shop, I'd never noticed that because it was where their wings tuck in at the back. And you just,
Yes.
so it's aside from learning a lot about zebra finches specifically, all of these, the scientific method, the noticing, the taking the time to observe and just actually look at what's going on, a lot of that was replicable and applicable later in my career with many other species. So yeah, it was a wonderful opportunity and it did set my career trajectory from there because it was so
Well, it was
formed.
original of you. It was very original and very, you didn't know what the outcome would be, which is what good
Mm,
science
mm,
is. You simply stay
mm,
the course. And then many years later, UC Davis, the famous American Veterinary College, invited you to come based on this work you'd done as a young man pre-veterinarian. I mean, it really was important in the field. And throughout the book, when you talk about many other species, whether they're sheep or chickens or hens or horses, you see those same repetitive
mm,
behaviors, the stress behaviors, and you were so attuned to them, you could walk into a barn and say, ah, yes, that animal's under stress. And the farmer or the other vet could say, he was fine. Look, he's got good bedding and food and
mm,
water, and it's fairly comfortable temperature in here. And you're like, no, that animal's actually in bad shape mentally or emotionally. What I'd love to do is invite you to read a passage because I really need people to understand that this is not a depressing book. It's an instructional, informational, fascinating book about how animals behave naturally and how we have inhibited it, and how in the UK and Europe they have forbidden a lot of the practices that are still being used in the US in the way that food animals are managed. And it's uplifting to know that things have gotten better, but also the writing about how animals are in the wild just observed is the way you write about it is just magical. It's completely poetic. So You can set the scene or just read the bit that I called out for you about the in the herons and hens passage chapter.
Yeah, sure. So in the herons and hens chapter, and each of the chapters, as you've said, Tracy, has that blend of something going on in nature that I found particularly affecting and beautiful, and then against the
Yes.
discussion around hen welfare in this chapter. We've talked about some of the welfare issues that face hens that we keep for their eggs. So when I go out into the countryside from a farm, I'm just sitting, thinking, and appreciating the natural world around me. So this is the passage that you've mentioned. A bird lands on a nearby telegraph wire and begins singing as dusk draws in. A small sparrow-sized bird of the countryside, corn bunting, his chest visibly swelling as he raises his open beak towards the sky and scatters his jangling notes upon the evening air. He turns his head from side to side, listening for a response, ensuring no unwelcome neighbors have moved in since dawn. The sun is now shining low across the plough lines over the field ahead. From beyond a long straight hedge that stretches to the distance, a white bird appears, flying slowly approximately 2 meters above the ground. Gleaming against the rich coal-black earth, passing through the silent space as a comet graces the heavens. The bird turns and banks vertically, disappearing into a grassy tussock. A barn owl's heart-shaped face is a floating parabolic reflector hoovering the miniature patter of mice, voles, and shrews from every crack, every depression, beneath every leaf. Every tiny footstep, every needle-thin exchange escorted from the land by specially adapted facial muscles and channeled into waiting ears to ignite white lightning. The rodent victims see and hear nothing. Not every deadly strike is successful. The owl flies closer, talons empty, streaming sunlight casting a halo around their pale wings as they pass close by, over the brook and beyond, with the composure and serenity of a cathedral bride.
It's just so beautiful because you've also described the way these hens live. And we've all heard about the problem with factory farm chickens and eggs. That's been well publicized. But you talk about it much more in a more granular way. Everyone knows, oh, the ones in the cages, it's the size of a sheet of paper in your computer. And we can envision that. But your description of what is missing in their life and what can so easily be included, or how to make it less miserable, or how to make it even quite good, is uplifting because you and others like you have actually changed the laws, or others with you, I should say. You've probably all done it together as a group. And it's uplifting. It isn't depressing. But when we think about those birds flying and then we see these chickens unable to even walk, some of them because of the genetic changes, because, and also because of they're there either for meat, in the case of the meat ones, which are chickens, or the hens who are there for eggs, and what their whole lifespan is like, how they start as a chick and how they wind up when they're no longer producing and where their bodies go. It's just, we should all know it because it's part of when people say about pet food, oh, we shouldn't buy pet food that involves, for example, chicken, because it's chicken that could have been on a human table. For the most part, no. It's I didn't know this, that they use the expired laying hens because they don't have any meat on them because they were never meant to be meat animals. So they do go into pet food. So their life is not completely wasted. And they've made this ridiculous number of eggs because they've, as you explain in very nice lay terms, how they are egg machines and how the eggs roll off on a conveyor belt and the food comes in another one. It's and how they need to roost and they need to forage and they need to roll around in the dust. And you think, yeah, that's not so hard to provide that. And you give us the sense that it's possible for all these animals who are confined. The pigs is one of the saddest ones, for sure.
Mm. Mm.
And I guess the veal calves, but you also explain, which I didn't know, because I'm like, I won't eat veal in America. I'll eat it in Italy because I've seen a veal calf. He just lives quietly in the barn. He isn't eating just milk and because the veal has a color to it. It's not white. So you explain how there's now something called pink veal being served in countries where the young calves are well treated before they
Yeah.
become food. They're not mistreated. So there's positive to the factory farming aspect or the large scale farming. The thing about the fox I want to talk about, which is so amazing, one of the times when you are just in nature, watching and seeing and smelling and hearing, this fox encounter with the ham is amazing.
Yeah, that was pretty extraordinary. Yeah, and I must say, so in terms of thinking about the rationale for including it as well, so for mostly, as we've said, the rationale was about this formula of describing beautiful nature so that we can pause and think
Yes,
and reflect. And
yes.
I just didn't quite have this. I was like, how can I, should I be trying to squeeze this interesting Fox story in? And there was a bit of discussion with the publisher because I thought, on balance, it's a lovely story, but I just can't make it work. And they said, no, I think people will really love the
Yes,
Fox story.
yes.
So the part story is, yeah, we were at home. My dad was at the front door and he called me in a whisper. I said, come and look at this little fox cub. And it was just passing through the front garden. That was remarkable, but unremarkable. And we just enjoyed it. And the little thing went through and that was that. But then a couple of days later, reappeared, the same little fox cub reappeared in the back garden. And I suppose because I was drawn to trying to see animals more closely, and I went out into the back garden and I walked very carefully and so on. And you could see there was a tameness there. There was a boldness. I mean, he or she was wary, but didn't run off in terror. And eventually, I started throwing the fox bits of food. You mentioned ham, and I have made been careful to make the point in the book that I would
Then it
always
was
promote higher
happily
welfare
raised ham.
ham,
Yes,
yeah, because I
you
can see
did. You did,
a
which was
clear
great. You remind
incongruence.
you remind us throughout the book of when you speak about a chicken, you say, but these were meat chickens, not hens. You do help us to remember that. And also, you do the same thing with cows, with cattle. You say this is a meat cow or cattle, and this is a milk cow, and how their lives are completely different. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
something we don't stop to think. And their lives are not fabulous, but on the other hand, are better than they were because of people like you who've observed and others who've observed and said, we don't need to do X, we could do Y. We could provide X instead of not providing it, whether
yeah,
it's a place to lie down or some shade or,
that's right.
to ruminate
Yeah,
in a
yeah. So,
natural way.
yeah, so the upshot of the story was that we did become friends, essentially. I'll say she would readily come and take food from my hand. But I think where it became really interesting, the game that I described, we had a fir tree in the back garden, and
Yes,
she would bring footballs, like light balls, what we would call a flyaway ball. It's like an
yes,
inflatable ball. There were children in the neighborhood. She'd steal them from other neighbors' gardens and come into ours with a ball. So I would start throwing this completely wild animal at a ball and she would toss it around. But when we started going around the fir tree, that was, yeah, it was really quite remarkable because she was playing what we would call here round and round the mulberry bush.
yes,
She would go to the far side of the fir tree. She'd
yes,
peep, was I left, was I
yes.
right? She'd spot me, and then in complete silence, but your ears filled with gleeful laughter, she'd bolt to the other side, and we could play that for ages. Again, she could have run away at any moment, but this was a game that I was playing with a wild animal, and we both knew the rules, and it
I
just
have to say,
carried on.
it's one of the wonderful parts of the book, and I think juxtaposed with the puppy mills and all that, since fox and dogs are different, and yet clearly your experience had a similarity. Sean Wensley, we've run short of time. Through a vet's eyes, how to care for animals and treat them better. And this means your birds and your cats and your dogs, not just those you might eat. The book is not available in America, but you can go to Blackwell's and there's no shipping charge. I cannot recommend it enough to any vet or vet tech. You must read this book. It's so marvelous. It's one of your own going out in the natural world and the unnatural animal world and helping us all understand it better. I'm looking forward to having you back again, Sean. There are so many topics in this book we all need to talk about more and understand, and admire you for bringing to our attention. So, thank you for your loving care of all these animals over the years, and thank you for letting us see the British skies through your eyes. It's been a real treat. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.